man. Continue.
I've been there. Like, sometimes the basket is too open. Right. She's used to getting double teamed. She's used to triple teams, and she's used to contact. And so sometimes when you see her, like, wait, what's coming? You want to look over your shoulder. But
hold on, Shanae. Hey, you only can say that about players who are too open shooting the three. Not right at the rim, dog. Come on, man. We don't say that for players right at the rim. Only when you're shooting threes, man. Sometimes you are too open when you shoot a three.
That explanation right there is why this whole halftime segment turned into a controversy. Missing because you are too open at the rim? Maybe there is context behind the rough start, but that is one explanation viewers were never going to let slide. And the deeper you go into this game
as well.
But it's actually Indiana that has 7 points off of the turnovers that Atlanta has created until we saw Angel Reese, shout out to our teammate, Angel Reese in particular, her energy shifted. I thought when she got some of those easy baskets to go in the paint that quite frankly she had struggled with to open the ball game, that's when you saw this defense begin to pick up its energy, this dream squad to begin to play with a little bit more confidence.
Yeah, athletes know it's not how you start, it's how you finish. And that energy is contagious because if you look at Angel Reese, she already has 7 and 9. She's already getting close to a double.
Now listen carefully to what the panel actually emphasized. Angel Reese had 7 points and 9 rebounds. Atlanta had found some momentum, and the argument was that her energy helped change the feel of the game. That part is completely fair to discuss. Reese is one of the league's most productive rebounders, and rebounding can absolutely create energy even when a player is struggling to score. But this is where viewers started asking a different question. Are we evaluating impact, or are we trying to rescue the narrative around somebody having a rough offensive half? Because those are not the same conversation. If you say Reese's rebounding helped Atlanta, fine. If you say she stayed active after missing shots, fine. If you say the Dream began playing with more confidence, that can be debated through what happened on the floor. The controversy starts when every negative detail gets immediately followed by an explanation for why it really wasn't that bad. And keep that distinction in mind, because later in this game there were several sequences involving the officiating and physical contact that make the halftime discussion look almost mild by comparison.
Plays, you see Caitlin orchestrating. It's like both sides are leaning into their strengths on this one.
Let's go back to Angel really quickly, though, because she was part of the catalyst that you saw to be able to change things around. And she said to Holly, I just feel like I needed to take a deep breath and maybe stop overthinking some of these.
Oh, I've been there.
Before Shanae answered, y'all saw how Shanae was like... Malika just jumped in mid-conversation with her mid-talking and say, yeah, but let's get back.
And there was another little moment people caught. The conversation briefly moves toward Caitlin Clark orchestrating Indiana's offense, and almost immediately it swings right back to Reese. Was that intentional? Nobody outside that desk can know that. It could simply be television pacing. Reese was one of the featured storylines, and producers regularly moved discussions toward whatever topic they planned for the segment. But perception matters. When viewers already believe certain players receive completely different treatment, interruptions like that become gasoline. The important thing is not whether somebody secretly wanted to avoid praising Clark. There is no evidence here proving that. The stronger criticism is much simpler. If you're analyzing a basketball game, let the basketball lead you. Clark controlling possessions is basketball. Reese rebounding is basketball. Missed shots are basketball. Blocks are basketball. You don't need a conspiracy to...
But not when you're right at the rim. That's ridiculous work, Shanae. Come on now.
But she settled into the game well, and what I like is she's been such a great mentor also to Medina Okot. I believe Medina Okot has 6 points, 6 rebounds as well. There's no one better to learn from when it comes to being a beast on the boards than Angel Reese.
Yeah, because
I'm glad she went rebounding, all right? Because I would give Angel that. She is a great rebounder, but, man, when it comes to scoring,
When the game started and Angel Reese was missing some of those bunnies, we were all talking about it, and I was like, she's not missing these because of Indiana's defense, and she's getting these layups, so that was a good sign, even though she wasn't finished.
This is probably the most defensible part of the entire segment, because the panel separates two things that viewers sometimes mix together. Reese can be an excellent rebounder, while simultaneously struggling badly as a finisher. Both can be true. That is actually where the analysis should have stayed. Giving her credit for teaching a younger teammate how to attack the boards makes basketball sense. Rebounding has been one of Reese's defining strengths. Positioning, pursuit, second effort, anticipating where misses come off the rim. Those are legitimate skills. But then the discussion turns back to the missed bunnies, and that's the part that created the disconnect. If a player is repeatedly getting opportunities close to the basket, creating those chances does matter. Getting yourself into scoring position is better than disappearing from the offense altogether, yet finishing is also part of the possession. You don't get full offensive credit for getting open if the ball doesn't go through the hoop. And this is where fans get frustrated with media analysis. Sometimes analysts become so determined to provide context that context starts sounding like an excuse. There's nothing wrong with saying she impacted the game despite shooting poorly. That sentence respects both sides. What bothers people is when the poor shooting itself starts getting...
Alicia Gray was holding it down.
But it...
Fam, she said Angel Reese was not missing because of the Indiana Fever's defense. Fam, she was blocked 3 times. She was blocked 3 times in the first half. What are you talking about? Hey, man, this is ridiculous work. Look, you can just see the double standard, right? If Caitlin Clark was 3 for 10 from the field, and mind you, shooting mid-ranges, right? Shooting mid-ranges, shooting threes, they would have had nothing good to say about Caitlin. They would have had nothing good to say about her, man. Like, stop with this.
And now we hit the sharpest disagreement from the original commentary. The host points out that Reese had shots altered or blocked and argues that saying Indiana's defense wasn't responsible for the misses ignores what actually happened on several possessions. There is an important nuance here. Not every miss is created by the defense. A player can miss a clean layup. A player can rush a shot because she expects contact. A defender can affect a possession without officially recording a block. And a player can also simply get rejected at the rim. Those possessions should not all be thrown into one bucket. That is why basketball analysis gets messy when people begin protecting a conclusion instead of describing individual plays. If Reese misses an uncontested look, call it an uncontested miss. If Indiana blocks her, credit Indiana. If Reese powers through contact and scores, credit Reese. Simple. The bigger comparison the host raises is Caitlin Clark. His argument is that if Clark were shooting poorly, especially on jumpers, commentators would be much less charitable. You can debate whether that's universally true, because different shows and analysts treat players differently, but you cannot deny why that perception exists. Clark and Reese have been attached to each other in public discussion for so long that almost every compliment toward one gets measured against how people would talk about the other. That turns routine analysis into a referendum, and once that happens, nobody hears Reese struggled at the rim. They hear your side is attacking Reese. Nobody hears Clark made a mistake. They hear your side is attacking Clark. Basketball gets swallowed by the rivalry.
See how some of these players get the big-time performance label, right? When they have a mediocre game, man, like, keep it a grand. Keep it a grand, dog. Angel Reese shot 31% from right under the rim. All right? 31%. Come on, dog. Like, but they said big-time performance. They putting her with Alicia Gray. Honestly, they should have been talking about Alicia Gray the entire time. Alicia Gray and Caitlin. They should have been talking about both of them.
This is where wording matters. The phrase big-time performance carries a certain expectation. If somebody hears that graphic or that description without watching the game, they probably imagine efficient scoring, dominant two-way play, or somebody completely taking over. The host's problem is that Reese was being grouped into a conversation where, in his view, Alicia Gray had done much more to deserve the spotlight. And that's a legitimate editorial question. You can celebrate milestones. You can celebrate rebounding. You can celebrate a double-double. You can celebrate a player battling through an ugly shooting night. But those are different accomplishments. If Gray is carrying the scoring burden and producing the cleaner offensive performance, then say that. If Reese reaches a career benchmark, say that separately. If Kelsey Mitchell makes a major contribution for Indiana, explain that separately too. Once all of those performances get flattened into one big-time label, fans are going to compare them, and the weakest efficiency line becomes the obvious target. This is not really about whether Angel Reese deserves praise. Of course she does when she plays well. It's about whether the praise accurately describes what she did. That distinction is about to matter even more, because the game itself started giving viewers reasons to stop talking about the studio desk and start looking directly at the officials.
Hold you, man. I was looking at this last night. I said, dog, just watch how she walked by. Just diabolical work. Watch this. Look at this. Man, this is hilarious, man. This is hilarious. My goodness.
And yes, this is the moment that turned the whole thing into social media comedy. The late miss, the walk by, the reactions around it. Fans were always going to freeze frame that sequence and turn it into memes. That's what happens when two players with this much attention share the floor. Every facial expression becomes evidence for somebody's favorite storyline. But be careful with those clips. A facial expression doesn't prove what somebody was thinking. Clark laughing near a Reese miss makes for an entertaining edit, but unless Clark publicly says what she was laughing about, nobody should pretend we can read her mind. The basketball result is enough. It was a tense finish. Reese had an opportunity near the basket. The shot didn't fall. And because of everything surrounding Clark and Reese, the internet immediately turned a basketball moment into a rivalry moment. That's the machine these two are playing inside now. Sometimes they don't even have to say anything. The audience writes the dialogue for them.
They were throwing life jackets out there for the Atlanta Dream. Throwing life jackets out there for them, man. Trying to make sure they stay in this game. They literally called this a foul. Fever challenged, and they still lost. Like, I'm like, yo, what in the world? Where's the foul? I mean, Caitlin Clark literally barely just touching Ryan Howard on the back, and they calling that a foul. Like, are you kidding me? She's fading to the side on her.
Now the game changes lanes. The host believes Indiana was getting a brutal whistle here, particularly on this contact involving Clark and Ryan Howard. He says Clark barely touches Howard and argues Howard is already drifting before the contact. The Fever challenged the call and, according to the source commentary, did not get it overturned. That does not automatically prove the officials were trying to keep Atlanta in the game. That's a much stronger accusation than the video can establish. Bad call? Debatable. Soft call? Fans can absolutely argue it. Officials intentionally trying to deliver the game to Atlanta? You need much more evidence before saying that is fact, and separating those claims matters because the officiating discussion is strong enough without exaggerating it. WNBA games can become incredibly difficult to officiate when players are changing direction, landing, reaching, and fighting through contact at full speed. A tiny push can matter. A natural fade can look like displacement. Replay angles can make contact appear larger or smaller depending on the camera. But fans don't judge those decisions in isolation. They judge consistency. If that light amount of contact gets called, what happens when the physicality becomes much more obvious? Well, keep watching.
And try to make sense of how Ryan Howard kicked Caitlin's inner thigh and called that a foul on her. That does not make any sense, Ryan. Like, come on, man. Come on, man. She was fading to the side on her own. Then he's talking about that little kick to the leg right there. Like, dog, stop it, man. I don't know what was going on with these refs.
This is exactly why one borderline whistle can poison the next 5 minutes of a game. Once viewers believe the threshold for a foul has been set that low, every uncalled bump becomes evidence of inconsistency. The commentator's frustration is pretty straightforward. If Clark's contact on Howard is enough for the whistle, then players and fans need to understand what the standard is going to be on the other end. That doesn't mean every piece of contact should be called. Nobody wants basketball reduced to a free throw contest. What players usually want is predictability. Let them understand what they can defend. Let them understand what they can fight through. And when replay is available, the expectation becomes even higher because viewers assume the correction mechanism should catch obvious mistakes. That is why a failed challenge can feel worse than the original whistle. The first call happens at full speed. The review happens with multiple angles and time to examine it. So when fans still disagree after replay, frustration doubles. And then came a piece of contact that looked a lot less subtle.
Angel put the hand to the throat on Caitlin. I don't know what Angel got going on, man, but she's been having some crazy plays. She's been looking like Dejanay lately. She's been looking like Dejanay. She's been slapping people, throat chopping. Look at this. right in the throat, throws Caitlin back, going for the rebound. And Caitlin like, dang, man, y'all gonna call that? Look, she's like, what in the? She hit me in the throat. Look, watch. Hitting her in the throat, dog. Like, what?
There's the play. The host describes Reese's hand making contact high around Clark's throat area while they're battling for the rebound. The replay is going to be interpreted differently depending on the angle, but the contact is clearly what sent Clark looking toward the official. Now, this is where criticism has to stay disciplined. You can say Reese got her hand high. You can say the play deserved a closer look. You can argue it should have been whistled. What you should not automatically say is that Reese intentionally tried to hit Clark in the throat unless you have evidence of intent. Basketball around the rim gets chaotic. Arms come down, players swim through box-outs, hands end up near faces, and sometimes dangerous-looking contact happens without a deliberate attempt to hurt anybody. But intent is not the only thing that matters. Officials also judge the nature of contact itself. And from the audience's perspective, this play becomes especially frustrating because it follows the softer call on Clark. That contrast is the real issue. A fan watches one possession and thinks, that's a foul, then watches this possession and asks, but that isn't. That is how officiating loses credibility in real time.
31 seconds on the clock. We had Kelsey Mitchell come out of her shoes, right? We had Kelsey Mitchell come out of her shoes. Stephanie White literally turned into another color, running down the floor trying to call timeout. Watch this. She comes. Now, I don't have it in this angle, but right here at this moment, Stephanie White is literally sprinting down the floor calling timeout. She's trying to call timeout. None of the refs are paying attention to it. 6 seconds on the clock. They waited until she had the Indiana Fever had 4 seconds on the clock to call the timeout.
And now you get one of those late-game administrative moments that drives coaches insane. According to the commentary, Stephanie White is trying to get a timeout while the possession continues, and the officials don't acknowledge it until Indiana has lost several seconds. Those seconds matter enormously in a close game. Late-game clock management is not some cosmetic detail. 4 seconds can be the difference between running a complete action and forcing a rushed attempt. It can change whether you have time for a second possession. It can decide whether you need a 3 or can still attack the basket. This is also where fans have to remember the officials are watching 10 players, the ball, contact, and the benches at the same time. Missing a coach attempting to signal timeout can happen. But it can happen does not mean it doesn't matter. White's reaction tells you exactly how valuable that clock was to Indiana, and it adds another layer to why the Fever side felt so aggrieved by the end. First a disputed foul, then high contact around Clark, then a timeout they believe wasn't recognized quickly enough. One event can feel random. Several events stacked together become a narrative. Whether that narrative is fair is another question, but this is how it forms.
Man, it's nasty work. Then also you had this one, right? Right at the end, on that last play, Angel Reese throws an elbow at Aaliyah Boston. Look at this. And Aaliyah Boston couldn't even react because if she did, game over, right? Game over. Look at this. Boom. An elbow to the throat right here. Look at this. Oh, my goodness. It might have hit her armpit, but, man, that looked like it's going right at her throat right there. Aaliyah Boston doesn't even react.
And there is the final piece that makes the halftime framing so difficult to defend. According to the original commentary, Reese herself acknowledged afterward that she had been playing poorly. Think about that. The player can admit she wasn't performing well, but some viewers felt the coverage was working harder to soften the performance than the player herself was. That is the real reason this clip traveled, not because analysts are forbidden from praising Angel Reese. Not because every positive comment about her is automatically glazing, and not because Caitlin Clark has to be the subject of every television segment. It traveled because sports fans can smell when language starts fighting what they believe they just watched. If a player is struggling, acknowledging the struggle builds credibility. Then when you praise her rebounding, toughness, or recovery, the compliment carries more weight because the audience knows you're not hiding anything. That's the standard every star should want. Clark included, Reese included. Gray included, Mitchell included, everybody. So now you've got to choose. Was the halftime crew simply doing its job by highlighting how Angel Reese stayed involved, rebounded, and helped Atlanta regain energy despite a bad start? Or did the analysis cross the line into making excuses for a rough offensive performance that should have been described much more plainly? And on the officiating, were those just normal controversial calls in a physical close game? Or did Indiana have a legitimate reason to feel the whistle was inconsistent down the stretch? Pick your side in the comments, because I already know people are going to be split on this one. If you want more WNBA breakdowns where we actually separate what happened on the floor from the narrative surrounding it, hit the like button, subscribe, turn on the notifications, and tell me which moment from this game bothered you the most.
But no, I had to bring this up, man, because this had me dying laughing this morning, dog. There's no way y'all was sitting here trying to cover for Angel Reese not performing well. I don't understand it. Even Angel came to the interview and said, I was playing like S. And y'all sitting here trying to act like she was just the best in that first half.
And this is the late sequence that brings us to the real payoff of the entire story. The host believes Reese throws an elbow high toward Aaliyah Boston while they're fighting for position. From the available description and replay commentary, the contact appears high, but again, intent is something viewers should be careful about declaring from one angle. Boston's response is also important. She doesn't retaliate, and in a late-game situation, that discipline can save you. One reaction after the whistle, one shove, one technical, one emotional decision, and suddenly an entire possession changes. That's the part of physical basketball that doesn't always show up in the box score. Players are not just managing the opponent, they're managing themselves. Now zoom out. We started with a halftime panel trying to explain why Reese was struggling near the rim. Then we moved through missed finishes, rebounding praise, the Clark-Reese rivalry, a disputed foul call, high contact, a timeout controversy, and another physical sequence near the end. And after watching all of it, the biggest issue isn't that ESPN said something nice about Angel Reese. That's too shallow. The bigger issue is selective framing. Sports media loses viewers when the audience feels analysts are deciding the story first and fitting the basketball around it afterward. If Reese is dominant on the glass, say she's dominant on the glass. If she's inefficient as a scorer, say she's inefficient as a scorer. If Clark controls Indiana's offense, say that. If Clark gets a favorable call, say that too. If Indiana benefits from officiating, point it out. If Atlanta benefits, point that out. The standard is what matters, because once viewers believe criticism is softened for one player and amplified for another, every sentence sounds political even when it isn't. And that is especially dangerous with Clark and Reese because their rivalry has become bigger than any one game. Every broadcast discussion gets dissected. Every graphic gets compared. Every missed shot becomes a meme. Every hard foul gets interpreted through history. Every compliment becomes evidence of favoritism to somebody. The only way through that is brutally simple analysis. Call the possession you see, not the player you like, not the player the internet hates, not the storyline that gets the most engagement, the possession. Reese's night can contain good rebounding and bad finishing simultaneously. Those ideas do not cancel each other out. Clark can play well and still commit fouls. Officials can make questionable decisions without there being some coordinated effort against a team. Nuance actually makes the controversy more interesting, not less. Because then we're arguing about basketball instead of pretending every event proves some giant conspiracy. And that's what made the too open explanation hit such a nerve. It sounded like analysis stretching beyond basketball common sense to protect the player from a simple conclusion. Sometimes you get a great opportunity and you miss it. That's sports. Even stars miss. Even great rebounders have ugly finishing nights. Even elite scorers go cold. The audience doesn't need those moments hidden. They need them explained accurately.